Oh great, so cinema is essentially dead now, eh? We've not been covering the likes of Warner Brothers being up for sale for a good while now, and ironically we covered pretty much every other person putting up a bid to buy David Zaslav's slop. And the one I chose not to even talk about and release was the potential idea that Netflix would buy Warner Brothers. It can't happen, surely not. It's the worst case scenario. And now it's been legitimized over the weekend. For the sake of cinema, I would want to say keep Netflix far away from Warner Brothers. But it's done now, and combining two of Hollywood's biggest companies into one giant yet less interesting one, I think is gonna be terrible for the industry. And it really does go to show that this sudden Warner Brothers sale was just David Zaslav's plan all along. The CEO that went out of his way to make the most short-term gains to long-term ruin, gaining himself hundreds of millions of dollars on top of his already extortionate extraction of profits. Just from this deal alone shows he is the sole winner for doing practically nothing good or creative or artistic. This is simply business dealings, extracting what was once a legacy pillar of a whole industry and running away with the money you've taken away from the arts. The likes of which we haven't really seen since the 20th Century Fox sale going to Disney a few years ago. Although, side note, my favorite theory about that old bidding war was that Universal deliberately put a higher bid in just so that Disney had to spend more money. And it worked, as it ended up being double their initial bid for it. Like, that level of spite, I could get behind. Now, with the old potential timeline that this was actually going to end up going to Paramount, I speculated on how that would really roll out from a business perspective. Not only would you get Bugs Bunny and SpongeBob crossing over, but you'd also basically have two major studios owned by one very rich man. Son, but it would at least be continuing the theatrical slate of movies that just sort of alternate labels. With this, it is a completely different scenario on our hands, because the insinuation seems to be that now all Warner Brothers projects will suddenly be taken out of the cinema experience. Netflix is the defining streaming service, seemingly always in debt, but also seemingly always having the money to spend. Business jargon, I'm sure. And this idea had been foreshadowed and speculated for a couple of months after the Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos recently attended a boxing match in Las Vegas alongside, guess who? David Zaslav. After one of their most successful theatrical runs ever for a single year, and you're telling me that this studio gets handed to a company who actively resents the theatrical business? It's just such a middle finger, you know? And then there's the implications with their own streaming service, HBO, Max, not Max, Max now, which in no doubt will get scrapped for parts just to boost Netflix's dominance. So many IP will now just be going to some form of Netflix, which is great for the streamer and people that already have a subscription. You can now gain access to Chernobyl and Game of Thrones and all of Looney Tunes. And there is some silver linings in that. But at the same time, you're completely destabilizing Hollywood on a scale far greater than the Disney-Fox merger, as this actually has a potential impact on the amount of movies that will get put in the theater from now on. And the theatrical experience itself is already a dying business since lockdown. All DC Universe movies going straight to Netflix. Well, actually, that's not exclusively true. They have actually come out and made a statement saying there will still be theatrical runs of movies, but they're gonna be a lot shorter runs so they can quickly go onto the streaming service that the company, you know, kind of monopolizes over. Is it a compromise? I don't really think so. And I think it's emblematic that the industry is rapidly changing around us. And maybe not for the better? A permanent subscription service on everybody rather than pay for the movie you want to see occasionally. Everything's just getting more expensive. And with Netflix now having a massively more successful library, you can bet they're going to be increasing their prices even more beyond so. In fact, they are the go-to company that typically raises their prices the most against every other streaming service, practically double the price in 14 years if you account for inflation. And you can bet it's going to be all the more since this is literally a monopoly of such a massive district of the industry. Specifically resisting to put movies that deserve a theatrical run in the theaters is something that they have done regardless of whether they would have performed stronger in a theatrical release. It's exactly what Netflix's recent MO has been, and it's just so disheartening to hear it taking place on such a massive swath of movie archives. Whilst at the same time, it totally makes sense why Netflix would be invested in a Warner Brothers merger. Not only because mergers gotta merge and become as conglomerate as you can, but obviously Netflix have missed the days where they had a vast library of other people's content and studios hadn't worked out just yet that they could just make their own streaming service. It's something I think they saw coming in the long run, which is why they then got started on their own original content to massively varying degrees of success. Whilst at the same time, the millions they spent on keeping Friends on the service shows that they still put value on having a library of favorites as well. And owning the company that makes Friends would certainly make that arrangement a little easier. Let alone if they moved all the Warner Brothers and HBO library onto there. Like, that's over 100 years worth of content. Ah, God, everyone's wallets are gonna get even thinner on this. Game of Thrones on Netflix definitely feels weird. And even just focusing on the streaming side of the industry, it's very clear that Netflix is kind of the big guy still going. Since with the nature of this industry already being monopolies getting bigger and bigger and merging together already, a lot of streaming services are on the way out, with HBO now being melted down, Hulu going over to Disney, whilst Paramount and Peacock seem to be on their last legs. You can assume these mergers are only going to continue until it is just Netflix, Disney Plus, and I guess Amazon if you want to count that, but they're their own conglomerate business with just a side hustle. And it all filters down to being the death of cinema and the big screen experience as people choose to hold on to what they can access for free at home right before the subscription prices go skyrocketing up through this monopolizing of film content. It's all just gonna get more expensive for us the more these businesses oversize themselves. But hey, let's talk about the animation side of this just for this channel's sake, because I guess in that sense, there's some silver linings. Because I certainly doubt we'll see Netflix squashing the animation library down, much like Warner Brothers and David Zaslav currently are at the moment. They a little bit ago made a former Disney guy the head of their animation, and we've seen with projects all the way up to this year's massive hit K-pop Demon Hunters that they are serious about animation, and there are some massive gains to be made there. So actually, Warner Brothers animation would perhaps be one of the few things to perhaps have a brighter future out of this. We would almost definitely get more Looney Tunes stuff from arguably the most reliable arm of Netflix's business right now. Plus, they're already making that live-action Scooby-Doo series that will probably be a disaster. And hey, with all of the drama and hubbub around the cancelled Coyote movie that's no longer cancelled, you can assume that Netflix would hear that and try to steer more into that direction of making more stuff like that. Plus, while there's only really a small handful of Looney Tunes movies like Scoob and Space Jam, not to mention Looney Tunes back in action, in a sense it'll be nice that can be readily accessible and consumed again, and maybe expands more in that direction. You know, like, maybe. I have a hint of optimism, only because it means Looney Tunes isn't dead, because they've been sold to someone able to make more stuff, but then doesn't post it anywhere big. It's a double-edged sword. But here's the thing. Netflix is already this intimidating void of content, right? That they're now going to add 100 years of Warner Brothers content to. This just absolutely epitomizes streaming now for me. You know, these giant libraries of content where there's so much on there that you ultimately kind of forget what's on there. These all-time classics just become extra panels on a never-ending landing page. I'm just saying, I'm starting to miss my old DVD shelf. But hey-ho, there's now enough on Netflix's resume to now be considered a major studio, but understandably, all the other studios who value cinema are wary of them being there in the first place. And here's another thing to consider, because they have been getting results from their recent limited theatrical releases. Whilst Netflix don't necessarily want their name on theatrically released movies, maybe they would see the benefit of having a different name owned by them doing that instead. So maybe Warner Brothers, in that sense, on an optimistic spin, could be their window into the theatrical business, whilst not muddying the waters with having the Netflix brand pop up in cinemas. That could very much be the plan. I just don't trust that right now, when they've otherwise just seemed to want to bring business away from theaters. At the very least, perhaps, we will never have to see another fully made animated movie cancelled for tax write-offs again. But overall, I think I'd rather have it stayed its own company as it has been for over 100 years now, rather than demolishing a pillar of film history and pasting it over with the modern streaming square. And worst of all, David Zaslav is the one who really wins. The Vecna of Hollywood, so it would seem. And what's worse when it comes to the actual logistics of this merger coming out, is apparently Trump is getting involved as well, currently wishing to be involved in that decision and speculating whether this could be a problem and may in fact get involved to avoid the monopolization of this merger. But looking at how it went last time, I think he's just after another part of the paycheck. Great. I've seen some people try to speculate whether this will actually bring the price of Netflix down since they've already made their money, and no, of course not. The closest we've got is a quote from the Netflix co-chief executive, Greg Peters, who when talking about the HBO name said that it was very powerful and would give the firm a lot of options. But you know that option only means up. And all for the low price of $72 billion. But I guess it really all is just emblematic that cinema is dead and the future is streaming and subscription services. A permanent price we have to pay every single month, much like the monetization of practically everything else in our life right now. Bring on 2026. For now though, I'd best finally end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell us your thoughts about the Netflix and Warner Brothers merger. Maybe find some optimistic spins if you want. Harry Potter's coming to Netflix. I hate that. But hey, Looney Tunes is back, so that's great. Do tell us all your thoughts and more. And I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!